Hello and welcome to the Motherhood Village podcast. I am on with a very special guest. I have Ashli Daley, the mama coach. Ashley's also a registered nurse with a background in NICU who is dedicated to supporting families through the journey of parenthood. She specializes in judgment-free infant feeding support, including help for moms with breast and bottle feeding problems. I love that, as well as holistic baby and toddler sleep coaching. Ashley offers personalized guidance tailored to each family's unique needs. With a commitment to unbiased advice and a deep understanding of the complexities of early parenthood, Ashley empowers parents to navigate the challenges of feeding and sleep with confidence and grace. Ashley, how are you today?
I am doing good. How are you, Nicole?
I'm great. I'm so excited to talk with you because, we'll just dive in, but you've been a really great resource for my moms of the Motherhood Village community, and you just come with a wealth of knowledge. So I'm excited to dive in. But first, I always like to ask my guests to name a favorite book and or one that has made a great impact. So it can be more than one.
Okay. So I will say I'm not a huge reader, but I love listening to podcasts. So apart from the Motherhood Village podcast, like I love the Mel Robbins podcast has been a huge podcast that has made a huge impact on me. So both actually the Mel Robbins podcast and I don't know if you've heard of the Mindset Mentor. Those have been two that have really taught me how to show myself a lot of self-compassion and just change the way that I think in general. And I think that has impacted me in such a huge way in life, like just helped me to change a lot of the ways that I show up in the world today.
I love that. And you got me thinking about that because I was like, it's almost like the season that you're in, right? And I think podcast books, it's the seasons that we're in that kind of help tailor. So I love that. I love Mel Robbins. The other one I've heard of, I haven't dived too deeply, but I love a good podcast. And I actually like seeing podcasts, which is why I'm diving more into the YouTube aspect because I like to have it and work and like I can see and then go back to work. Like it's just a thing I like to do. But okay. Let's dive in. So sleep.
Yes.
I know this is a word everyone, sleep training coach and I get it. My little guy is 6, so taking back to their understanding like the whole sleep aspect, I think it's been a bit more overwhelming in the most recent years, right? Even me still kind of in that new phase. I mean, he's 6, so fairly new mom per se, but I just feel like there's so much information. I wanted to dive right into sleep, but I want my parents listening to this to really get an understanding of kind of your background. And then maybe also after you kind of give a high level intro of that, of your background, NICU nurse, all the things, why sleep and why coaching was big for you to transition to. And then we'll get into kind of some of the nitty gritty sleep questions.
Of course. So I'm a registered nurse, and my background comes from working in the NICU. And funny story. So my entire childhood, I used to watch a lot of baby delivery shows. So for whatever reason, I knew from a little child, I knew I wanted to go into some field of working with moms and babies, and it led me to the NICU. And working in the NICU was super, super rewarding. Like I loved it to my core. I worked in high level NICU for 5 years. I worked as a staff nurse for 3 years and then transitioned into
Wow.
nursing. But I really realized that there was a huge deficit, when a baby was in the NICU for, extended period of times. Like sometimes we think that sometimes, NICU stays are really short where a baby might be in the NICU for 3, 4, 5 days. But we do have babies who end up staying with us for, 2+ months. And you have these babies here who are being cared for by medical professionals. And then one day we say to the parents, okay, your baby's going home now. And you're going home without
Crazy.
the monitors, you're going home without the healthcare providers, you're going home and you just have to figure it out. And when I really thought about that, it's like, well, who helps these parents? Like I'm here teaching and doing all the teaching I can about the NICU. Now, who teaches you when you're at home and guides you? And I never expected to go into this coaching aspect of anything. This was never a plan of mine. Like I always thought that bedside nursing was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I stumbled upon the Mama Coach as a brand, and it called to me. And learning a lot more about like our programming and the way that we help families with breastfeeding, helping families with sleep, helping families with bottle feeding, kind of just supporting family and being that non-judgmental support for families with any of that transition from, home to, or from hospital to home, we know that there's a huge gap, right? We tell parents to do like all this big preparation for birth, and then we show you the big list of things you need to have for, you know, your postpartum journey, like your, you know, a big list of things to add to your baby shower or your baby registry. And I think one of the biggest things that we forget about is the actual support aspect of it. And I know in previous episodes of the podcast, we talked about, you know, parenthood is, it's like a job with no interview. There's no training, there's nothing. And support is so hugely underutilized, and it's not really thought about as much as it should be. So I feel like that's kind of what led me into this space. And I do know that there will always be questions. There's things constantly changing. The way that, you know, babies feed, it's constantly changing. We're learning more about how they feed. We're learning more about how they sleep. And the more we learn is the more that we can help and support families.
I love that. And yes, my episode with Dr. Youssef, which we both know, he really broke it down, was like, if you were owning a company, if you were at work as an employer, you'd have basically like an advisory board, right? Or some type of kind of like executive team you'd reach out to. Like there's some kind of like, yeah, advisory board. And for parenthood, he essentially was saying like that is needed as well. You need a sleep coach, a this, a that, you need a support group. Like you need all the things because to your point, and I couldn't even imagine leaving the NICU and now, that you were in this safe bubble. And then it's like, okay, bye, figure it out. So I think the work that you're doing is just fantastic because to your point, you can then help guide them and offer the support from the hospital, home, wherever they're birthing, to home. And before we dive into the sleep, I love how I had mentioned in your bio how you do breast and bottle feeding, because I think a lot of people think, with bottles it will come easy, and that's not necessarily the case. So I love that there's no judgment and that you really help parents kind of see the full spectrum and understanding and making them, really feel comfortable that you're not going crazy. This is normal. Some things might be challenging. Maybe it's the nipple, maybe it's this, because I've heard you give some advice in the chat. So that's awesome, that it's kind of well-rounded, and then taking your expertise of being in the NICU and being a registered nurse. Like I think it's a full, well-rounded support that you're able to give. But let's dive into sleep. So what made you really want to focus on the sleep training? Why did you feel it was important? And then shed light maybe on some things that you kind of wish parents knew with regard to sleep, regarding sleep patterns, and maybe managing parents' expectations. Like maybe talk a little bit about that.
Right. So I feel like I kind of got an interest in sleep because I kind of struggled with sleep most of my teenage, young adult, I'm still a young adult, but most of my life, and I still struggle. And I know it's really hard. Like it affects the way that you function, right? And as parents, you're bound to lose sleep. You're bound to lose some amount of sleep, and there's nothing that you can really do about that. Like losing some amount of sleep is going to be normal in those early days of parenthood. You have a newborn, your expectations of sleep, it has to shift a little bit, right? So I felt like I got really drawn to sleep because of the fact that I struggled with sleep. Like I know what it's like to be, exhausted, but I also know what it's like to tell someone that I'm struggling with sleep and then being thrown all the generic advice. I get the advice of, well, I know it's still bad, but don't sleep with your phone, or don't, scroll on your phone before bedtime. And I know it's not the best thing to do, but it's a part of my routine and it works for me and it doesn't disrupt
Yes.
sleep. And I think that with all the different doctors that I talk to about my sleep challenges, like now I'm realizing that it more so was more of my nervous system. I was really anxious. I was struggling with my mental health. I was severely overweight. There are a lot of other things that were going on that just wasn't addressed. And the biggest thing that my doctors chose to focus on was the fact that I would use my phone right before bed, and it just didn't make sense that that was the only reason that I didn't sleep. Like there were just a lot of other pieces to the puzzle that didn't make sense, and I did the work to figure it out. And I feel like I almost use or programming to figure out my sleep challenges, and it worked for me. So it's again like giving yourself a lot of compassion there. But in terms of typical infant sleep patterns, so I love to talk about newborns and newborn sleep because newborns are their own little category. They're very, very special, and they're so new to the world. They have no idea what's going on. And this is exactly how I explain it to my families that I work with. They are so pure, they're so precious. They have no idea what's going on. They are confused. So when people say that, newborns have day-night confusion, yes, they do. And that's something that's normal. It's normal for the baby to be confused with their days and nights. And they spend that fourth trimester, so those first 12 to 14 weeks, kind of figuring it out. So things that you can do to help them to figure it out, you've probably seen it all on the internet. Have them nap in a bright room, keep the, environment loud, like don't, dim or shush any noises. Those are things that are really, really normal for newborns. Now, as your baby grows and they get older, we come upon what we know commonly as the 4-month sleep regression, which, surprise, it can happen earlier than 4 months. It can actually happen as early as 3 months. And it's not so much a regression as that your baby's going backwards, but it's a progression in development. So your baby's sleep cycles are changing, they're maturing, they're moving from a newborn sleep cycle where they're super confused and they have no circadian rhythm, they have no idea what's going on, and now they're maturing to an infant-like sleep cycle where they're a little bit more familiar with, routines. They're paying attention now to what's helping them to fall asleep. They're paying attention to who's helping them fall asleep. They're paying attention to the sleep environment that they're in. They're paying attention to any noises, anything that's on them, anything that's in their body. Now everything is going to, affect the way that they actually do sleep. So typically what I say is like the newborn stage is the newborn stage. Let newborns do what newborns do best, which is sleep, and get them as much sleep as they can. But as they do transition out of that newborn sleep cycle, if there's anything that doesn't work for you, that's a beautiful time to change it. When you notice that your baby's sleep cycles are starting to mature, you're noticing that they're noticing a lot more around them. They're noticing a lot of things as it relates to them falling asleep, and it's not working for your family, then that's the time that you can make changes. There's a lot of pressure, I feel like, for families to, enter this sleep training or necessarily make changes to their baby's routine. Like, you do see a lot of things out there on the internet, like after a certain age you should stop rocking your baby to sleep, you should stop feeding your baby to sleep, and it's not necessarily that. you know as humans, I like to put this out there, as humans, we don't sleep through the night, and it's not a realistic expectation for a baby to sleep through the night. Even if a baby is sleep trained, they don't sleep through the night. They still wake. As humans, we all wake, and this is all sleep science. As humans, we all wake 4 to 6 times throughout the night. It's just that as adults, like, the wakings are really, really brief, and we don't even notice that they're happening.
I love the expectation, which brought me back to another conversation I had that just posted with Coach Casabo, where we were talking about like the whole gentle parenting concept. And he was like, yes, there is something to that. And it's great that we're now talking about letting the child speak and being validated. He's like, but that doesn't mean that you're not authoritative, right? The parent still has to lead. He's like, we have to go back to understanding the parent leads, the parent still holds boundaries. So he's like, so we have to let go of that expectation that like, oh, we're going to gentle parent, we're going to connect, and my child is just going to like never throw a tantrum. He's like, you're just setting yourself up. So to your point, it's like this expectation that if I sleep train, if I this, like, we're never not going to have, or we're not going to lose out on sleep. So I love how you said that, because I think a lot of times, yeah, we want that quick fix, or as moms are like, but wait, it should be. And it's like, no, like, this is a part of like what it is. And I'm sure to your point, and maybe this can go into the next portion of like the misconceptions, but I would imagine like every baby is different, and some may need a little bit more, and maybe tell me the right word. Is it help? Is it assistance to kind of get them in the right
Support.
way,
A little more
right?
support or
A, li-
reassure.
there you go, like more support, and maybe you have to change things around a bit for them. But I mean, you're with a newborn, so yeah, the sleep and the food go hand in hand, because they can't sleep too long because they need to eat. I remember I had that problem with my little guy, and my husband's like, he's supposed to sleep, and I'm like, no, he's too lethargic. I was like, this, no, 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 diapers weren't as much, and we came to find out he wasn't getting enough of my milk, so that's a whole different thing. But to your point, it's sleeping, eating, bathroom. So every 2 hours, whatever that cycle is. So I love that. I love setting that expectation for new moms to say, listen, going to be hard in the beginning, right? Maybe a little more than others. And maybe to your point, that's why you get more support. That's why you hire maybe a mama coach to walk you through it. So now let's get into the misconceptions. And we don't have to stay here long because I really want to focus on more of like the positive and things that I know that you kind of work through. But what are some misconceptions? I guess we can weave it in. What are some misconceptions that you hear and that you really want parents to understand? And then we'll even pivot into like sleep patterns, and are there red flags or bad sleep habits, or maybe that is a misconception. So let's kind of bundle those two, but let's first start with some misconceptions that you want parents to like kind of the myths to kind of let go of.
So I love that you even just started with bad habits because that's the number one misconception that I want to squash. When it comes to sleep, there is no such thing as a bad habit. What you do for your family is not a bad habit. Nursing your baby to sleep is not a bad habit. Rocking your baby to sleep is not a bad habit. Nothing that you do with your baby to comfort them and give them love is considered a bad habit. You will never look back and think, I nursed my baby to sleep too much or I rocked my baby to sleep too much. You will never look back and say that. So that's one narrative that I would love to squash. The other ones just don't really make a whole lot of sense, but we can go through like the list of myths.
Yeah, you can put a couple, but I loved how you said that because I think moms get guilt shamed a lot, especially by the older generation or some moms or parents that just cannot keep their opinions and thoughts to themselves. I went through a lot of that because we had an older woman nurse with us and she was from a different generation time. And anytime my son would wake up, like the anxiousness I got because I was like, she's probably like, put that bit, so I was like, run. And it was just a lot and just not fair. So maybe just give a few more misconceptions. And then I want you to talk about your holistic baby coaching and how that maybe ties in, because that's probably a good segue of like, here are some misconceptions, but then here are some ways that we do it.
Yes. So some of the things that I have heard throughout working with families, is, a lot of times these families have either seen things on social media or they've heard things from other, from Facebook groups, or they've heard things from other moms. And number one, like there's a lot of different advice out there, right? The internet is inundated with a ton of baby sleep advice. And I like to say that if it works, it works, and none of it's really wrong. Like there's no wrong way, there's no one right way to help a baby sleep. Like if it works, right? So typically, nothing added at bedtime in terms of feeding will really help a baby to sleep better at night. Typically when we look at, feeding being the reason that a baby isn't sleeping at night or sleeping through the night, we want to think about the reasons that a baby is actually waking overnight, which can be a lot of different reasons. Like babies can wake from hunger, they can wake because they are lonely, they can wake because they're teething, they can wake because they're not feeling well. There's so many reasons that babies can wake, and so it's really, really important that we're looking at all those reasons and not just labeling one specific item as a reason that a baby's waking at night. And that's why I say sleep is just often not, it's not isolated.
May I ask this before you jump back into then your holistic approach to it compared to like traditional sleep training? We can talk about that. It's something just came to my mind of, can you also look at sleep patterns over like a period of time? So if they're just waking up, should you look at it as more of like a pattern and things like that? The same thing like with feeding, to where it's like, okay, might be getting up here, but to your point, maybe it's the regression, maybe it's the teething. Like, do you look at the patterns? Is that part of it, the process as well?
Absolutely. So sleep science actually tells us a lot when it comes to babies' sleep patterns and the way that they wake. So and I'll tell you like some of the really helpful ones to look out for. So number one, I don't recommend tracking your baby's sleep if you're not planning to do anything about it. Don't do that. It honestly, it causes you to almost lose trust in your baby and lose trust in yourself. And you give a lot more control to the app than you do to your baby. So unless you're noticing a pattern that just isn't working and you want to track that pattern to make a change, there's no reason to really track your baby's sleep. But if you notice certain patterns, so for example, if you notice that your baby's waking in the middle of the night and they're staying awake for extended periods in the night, so they're staying awake for about 30 minutes to, longer than 30 minutes, they're staying awake for longer than 30 minutes, we typically call that a split night. And what that can tell us is that the baby's getting a little bit too much sleep during the daytime. So maybe we need to start capping the naps or shortening some of the daytime naps so that that can help the baby to have enough sleep drive or be tired enough to sleep the full night rather than waking up throughout the night. There's other patterns that we can tell. So if a baby is possibly overtired, so we know that a baby who's overtired is going to have a harder time falling asleep. They're going to have a harder time staying asleep. And throughout the night, we're in different cycles of or different stages of sleep. And for an overtired baby, they're going to spend a lot more time in light sleep, which means that they're a lot easier to wake up. And things that can wake them up, their belly growling, any light that's coming in through the windows, if the room is too warm or if the room is too cold, like little things like that, they actually matter, and they make a huge difference when it comes to sleep for your baby. So it's really, really important to know that, once your baby does switch from that newborn to infant like sleep cycle, there's a lot of different things that can affect the way that they sleep and the patterns that they're waking in.
What about the old generation? You just had me thinking when you said that because it was like the littlest thing. One of the things my sister and I not struggled with, but that we would kind of banter back and forth with our parents with because especially when my sister lived with them, that she wanted things quiet to get them on her consistent schedule. And of course, my mom and dad are like, we had so much noise. You would sleep all through the parties. And we were like, but did we? Or were you just having so much fun in the party that you didn't hear us crying to the point that we fell asleep? Like we would like mess with them. But what do you say to those like generation of like, but you slept through everything? And is it kind of like, oh, well, did you? Or was it, like talk to me about that? Because I'm sure you hear that. I'm sure you come across it. What do you say to those that are like, but we did it this way and you slept fine?
So I always say, I get it. I get it, but we would like to try things differently, because I do see that where we do have like the grandparents say, well, we don't want, the baby being rocked to sleep. And it's like, you had your chance to do what you wanted to do with your little one.
Correct.
Now let's give this family a chance to do what they want to do with their little one. And that looks like they want to rock the baby to sleep and have that extra time with the baby to sleep. I get where you're coming from. I get it, but I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah. And truthfully, like we would argue back too and say, yeah, like obviously if a baby is tired and a person's tired, they will fall asleep. Like at some point, like I get it, like maybe to the fault of whatever, it might take them longer. And then yeah, Jace has like slept through whatever that noise was. But if it's already quiet and then then you want to throw the music, like it's kind of common sense. Like if I'm sleeping and then all of a sudden we're having a party, like how would I not wake up? I'd be like, what is that noise? So I didn't necessarily understand that kind of argument with it on their side. But yeah, I mean, if you're at a party and I just happen to fall asleep, but I probably fell asleep at like midnight, right? Like, let's be real. They weren't putting me to bed at like 8 p.m.
Yeah. No. And honestly, the only human being that would likely sleep through noise is a newborn. After like 6 weeks, most of them don't want to sleep in any noise, any bright environments. They're like,
No.
absolutely not. I need my peace and quiet. I would like you to tone it all the way down.
For sure. Okay, so let's talk as we kind of come here. Talk to me about the holistic approach that you take through your mama coaching versus some traditional sleep methods. And again, I know you kind of preface this with like, listen, you got to do with what works for you, and there's different things, but talk a little bit about the approach that you take compared to other methods.
Right. So I do a huge focus on feeding. Feeding and sleep go hand in hand. If a baby isn't feeding well, they will likely not sleep well. And oftentimes, when families are reaching out to me, it's because their babies aren't sleeping well. They're waking frequently throughout the night. And my approach, it really goes on what the parents are looking for. Like, I want to know what your goal is. And surprisingly, most of the time, most families aren't looking for their babies to sleep through the night because they're already aware that that's not a realistic goal. And they're fully aware that it's okay for their babies to wake in the night for hunger. Like it's okay for a baby to wake hungry at night. And so it's my approach is more so listening to what the family's goals are. But then we're going to look at different aspects of what is it that's causing your baby to wake at night? Is it a feeding challenge? And we're going deep into feeding because we really need to optimize feeding for this baby and ensure that that baby is getting adequate nutrition so that they can sleep. Um, So I want to look at, is the baby breastfeeding or is the baby bottle feeding, and how is the baby feeding? Is the baby able to take effective feeds during the daytime? And I go as deep as I'm assessing for oral ties. I'm assessing this baby for body tension. If this baby has any kind of body tension or any kind of oral ties, anything that's disrupting the feeding process in general, that's likely going to cause some sleep challenges there for that baby. We're also going to look at the baby's sleep schedule, look at the sleep patterns that the baby's currently doing. How frequently is the baby waking at night? What do naps look like for the baby? Is the baby getting enough sleep? Oftentimes, like I use a sleep science approach. So we want to ensure that this baby is getting enough sleep for their age, ensuring that they're staying within the recommended sleep guidelines for their age. But then we're also looking at what we call wake windows and awake times. Now, they're not a one size fits all. You'll see a lot of things out there about awake times and awake windows. So they're a range, and the range is exactly what it is. It's a range. So every baby's going to fall at a different part of the range, and it's figuring out where your baby falls in that range depending on their temperament. Where I come in as a mama coach, I'll sometimes tell families, you don't really need me. Like, depending on what your goal is, like, are you looking to actually change routines? Are you looking to get more sleep? Or do you think that there's something concerning about the way that your child is sleeping? If you're truly concerned about the way that your child is sleeping, then here, yes, I'll help you through it. But my process isn't more so, okay, I'm gonna help, your baby is sleeping, like a normal baby, like they're waking 1 to 2 times a night. I'm not gonna tell you, well, let's figure out a way to get your baby to stop waking for their feeds, or figure out a way for your baby to, stop waking for X reason. Like, let's look at the bigger picture. And sometimes I find that a lot of the reasons that families reach out to me is because of the pressure from external sources. And when I get, really on a eye to eye level with these families, I'm like, well, what do you want? What is your, dream bedtime routine? And half the time when I ask that question, it's really interesting that families have a really hard time telling me what they would want their bedtime to look like.
Yeah, because I think in society it's just never talked about, and we've heard forever like baby sleeps, baby this. I know for me, like I nursed him every time he woke up. Like that's what I wanted to do. And there were times that he would sleep, and there were other times where I can kind of see, okay, to your point, like I kind of had the know withal, wherewithal, whatever, to say, okay, this might be a regression. And of course, there's some apps that maybe can give like, okay, they may be approaching this or that. So I made peace with it. Or if he was teething, but for the most part, like he would wake up maybe once, maybe twice through different spans. So I knew I had to put the ownership on me to say, okay, if I want this and if I want to still feed him, because I had already went back to work, so I knew we were missing that breastfeeding time during the day. So I was like, okay, this is our time together. I said, all right, then Nicole, you have to go to bed early, right? You have to make sure that you're taking care of you so that I am not even more overwhelmed, right? Because then I think what happens with parents often, especially mothers, right? Because let's be real, we're talking newborn stage, like mom's usually the one, especially if breastfeeding, kind of in that. I have to really have the kind of hard conversation with me. But like you said, parents don't really know what that looks like because of society pressures. I had to really dig deep and say, well, what do I want for me? And for my own guilt, I said, well, if he cries and needs milk or whatever, then I'm going to nurse him and kind of have that connection. And now that you mention it, he could have even been crying because maybe he's like, Mommy, I hadn't seen you all day and this is like our time. Like it could be any of that. I know it's hard to think of that because they're babies, but all of that matters, right? Okay. So let's pivot into the sleep routines. So I know you've mentioned sleep routines before, and I know this comes up often in the support groups that you're a part of like traveling and all the moms are scared and all the things, illness and things kind of go out of whack. So talk to me about how important sleep routines are, or are they not, right? Let's talk about that. And then how important are they to maintain if traveling or if there's illness, and why is it crucial for short-term and long-term sleep success?
So I will start by saying routines are always very, very important. In anything that you're doing, a routine will always help. Sleep routines are extremely helpful because you know what? Babies can't tell time. Routines are the only thing that helps them to know what to expect next. So having a routine is going to be really helpful so that they know that sleep is what comes next, right? So when we talk about bedtime routines, I like to say it differs for, again, it differs for newborns versus an infant who has transitioned from that newborn to infant sleep cycle, because this is what helps a baby to know what comes next and what to expect next. So I like to say it's not necessarily that you need to, have this long drawn out routine for a baby. It's really nice to think that for us as adults, we may love this, a nice long bath, and then we want to listen to some relaxing music and have this nice long wind down routine. Babies don't like that. They like fun and they like quick connection, snuggles, and then it's time for sleep. Let's get this show on the road, and let me get the sleep that I need. So when it comes to having a routine, I like to say pick parts that are simple, things that work for your family. It doesn't need to be, that you're doing a bath every single night if that's not something that your family typically does. If your family typically does a bath, during the day, that's okay too. If you found that your, a bath close to bedtime is going to overstimulate your baby, or maybe your baby doesn't like baths close to bedtime, then move the bath up to the daytime. Maybe that doesn't have to be a part of your bedtime routine. So I say that all to say it doesn't really matter what your bedtime routine looks like. I would just have one that's quick, simple, and works for your family. And this is something that you would want to use and maintain in those really hard times, such as traveling and, while your baby is sick, as well as going through regressions. So babies will go through regressions. And again, it's not that baby forgot to sleep, but it's usually a progression in development. And it's usually all related to when a baby's learning a new skill. So we
Mm.
typically hear about the 4 month sleep regression, like we talked about earlier. So it can happen as early as 3 months, and we're thinking it's because of that change in sleep cycle. Then there's like a 6 month sleep regression, which is when a lot of babies are starting to learn how to sit up. Then there's the 8 month regression when they're starting to learn how to crawl. Then the 10 month, they're starting to pull to stand and separation anxiety. So it's typically all usually associated with some large developmental change that's going on. And that's why they're so frequent during that first year of life for a baby. So having a consistent routine around sleep is what's going to help your baby to know that sleep is coming next. My biggest tip to help families like moving through those really difficult times of sleep disruptions is honestly just not adding anything that you don't want to sustain.
I love that.
So if you consistently rocked your baby to sleep and your baby slept fine being rocked to sleep, know that, when they're going through regressions, they may wake more frequently. They may have a harder time going down for sleep. When they're ill, they may want to rock a little bit longer. They may want extra cuddles, and that's totally okay. But as long as you're keeping the routine consistent that we're rocking to sleep and then I'm putting you in bed, you're not introducing a new what we would call association, or not starting a whole new routine of
Yeah.
something that we can't sustain or we don't want to sustain.
And it sounds like it still goes back to expectations, right? Of like being like this, and let's talk about this. What are the expectations for your family, for the baby? How much time, like what is important to you, and all of that. So I love that. How can people connect with you? Do you work with people virtually? Is it in person? Like, talk to me about all the things and how they can reach out to you.
Yes, so I try to be very active on social media. I'm on Instagram at Ashli the Mama Coach. And then families typically can reach out to me on Instagram, but I do have a website which does handle all of my bookings. I do typically offer families a 15-minute consultation just to learn a little bit more about their story and kind of what they're looking for, and learn a little bit more about their goals, and to see if we would be a good fit to work together. But I do have a website. Typically, most of my consultations are in person, but I do virtual consultations as well. And how my process works is that I typically see families either in their home or virtually for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we talk about all the things that we can possibly talk about in 2 hours related to that. Again, looking at babies feeding patterns, looking at babies schedule from a sleep science perspective, and then looking at parenting styles and parenting goals. And then we are together for about a month, so we're checking in every week for a month, and throughout that month we're doing coaching calls. So I'm the one who handles all the what ifs. I do have all the families that they focus a lot on the big goal and the end picture, and then there's a lot of coaching that goes on in the background. So typically, again, families can reach on the website, but my consultations are mostly in home. I love doing in home visits with families and just getting to talk with them face to face and it helps me to learn a little bit more about how they are and how they interact with their babies and how they can comfort their babies and help their babies when it comes to learning new sleep skills.
I love that. Actually, before we part ways here, I always ask my guests to share some final thoughts. So if someone was listening to this episode, what do you think? What are the things that you're like, if you had to listen to this, these are the takeaways. These are the must knows, the non-negotiables of it all.
I say be flexible. Baby sleep is hard because it's hard. It's not hard because you're doing anything wrong. You know, it's easier to shift your expectations and know what normal baby sleep looks like versus putting on someone else's expectation of your baby's sleep on them. It can make it really challenging for your parenting journey, and it can make it really challenging for you. Trust your gut, trust your instinct. If it works for your family, it works for your family. Like, do not feel pressure to change anything or do anything that doesn't feel right for you.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's a mic drop. Thank you so much, Ashley, for coming on, for sharing some great expertise. We talk about this. I think with social media, people can connect with you, people can connect with me, and there's so much grace and so much great things that come from that. But then on the flip side, it can be very overwhelming. So many people have opinions. I just wrote a piece about like picking the right school, and I really wanted to make sure moms, especially those new moms in it, knowing that there's a lot of biased, subjective answers out there. And I think the same thing can go for sleep and bottle feeding and breastfeeding and all the things. So it's really important to connect with someone like yourself, or get to a safe community of people that you can really trust, so that you're not getting, this subjective biased opinion for someone that was their experience. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be yours. So thank you so much for coming on, for sharing such wonderful tips and experience, and for all the work that you do for the mamas out there, including the Motherhood Village, and continued blessings to you for love and light.